I felt the chill before I heard the howls. That's how it always begins in our world, with a physical sensation that warns you something has shifted in the natural order. The late autumn air cut through my thin sweater as I stood at the edge of the gathering, watching as they carried his body into the clearing. The Alpha King, Emmett Blackwood, looked smaller in death. His massive frame, usually radiating power and authority, now lay motionless on the ceremonial wooden platform. Around me, pack members moved in coordinated grief. The strongest warriors bearing his weight, the elders walking behind with herbs and ancient artifacts, the council members with their heads bowed in reverence. And then there was me, neither here nor there, existing in the periphery as I always had. The scent of crushed pine needles and ceremonial sage burned my nostrils. Overhead, ravens circled and called to one another, as if they too understood the significance of this moment. The pack was losing its anchor, its protector, its heart. "Stand back further, Harper," Elena whispered harshly, nudging me with her elbow. Even in mourning, the beta female couldn't resist reminding me of my place. My blonde hair, too light, too human-looking compared to the rich, dark tones most pack members possessed, fell across my face as I lowered my eyes and stepped backward. I clutched the small river stone in my pocket, running my thumb over its smooth surface. My mother had given it to me before she died, when I was just 7 years old. "Water doesn't fight the rock," she had told me. "It simply finds another way around. Remember that, Harper. Your strength isn't in confrontation, but in adaptation." For 15 years I had adapted. I had accepted the sideways glances, the whispered comments, the assignments nobody else wanted. As the only Omega in a pack that valued strength above all else, I had learned to make myself useful in other ways, tending to the sick, mediating minor disputes, caring for the pups when their parents joined hunts. The procession stopped at the center of the clearing. Reagan, the head elder, stepped forward with a bundle of smoking herbs. Her weathered face was a map of grief as she began the ancient chant, her voice rising and falling with the wind. The pack joined in, 100 voices becoming one, except mine, which remained silent. I knew the words, but had never been invited to participate. I studied Emmett's face from my position at the back. Even in death, his features carried that stern authority that had both terrified and fascinated me. As Alpha King, he had been just and fair, if distant. He had never been cruel to me, not personally, but he had allowed the cruelty of others to continue unchecked. Perhaps that was cruelty enough. And yet, something felt wrong about this ceremony. My skin prickled with unease, a sensation I had learned to trust over the years. The elders were rushing. The traditional 3-day viewing period had been condensed to mere hours. The burial preparations were happening too quickly, too urgently. Whispers floated around the gathering. Poison, some said. Rival pack, others suggested. A curse, the more superstitious murmured. But beneath these theories, I sensed a current of something else. Fear. Not just grief for their fallen leader, but fear of what would come next. Dominic, the Alpha King's son and heir, stood at the head of the platform, his face a mask of controlled rage. At 28, he was the image of his father, tall, broad-shouldered, with sharp features and eyes that seemed to see right through pretense. Unlike his father, however, there was something volatile about Dominic, something unpredictable that made even the strongest warriors tread carefully around him. "We lay to rest our king," Reagan announced, her voice carrying across the silent clearing. "We honor his strength, his wisdom, his protection. May the earth welcome him, and the moon guide his spirit." As she spoke these words, I felt a strange tug inside my chest, as if something were pulling me forward. Without consciously deciding to move, I found myself taking one step, then another, moving through the crowd that parted in surprise and annoyance at my approach. "What is she doing?" someone hissed. "Control your Omega," another voice demanded, though it wasn't clear who they were addressing. No one claimed responsibility for me anymore. Not since my mother died and my father disappeared soon after. I stopped a few feet from the platform, close enough now to see the unnatural pallor of Emmett's skin, the slight bluish tinge to his lips. My heart raced with a certainty I couldn't explain. "Wait," I said, my voice barely audible even to my own ears. Reagan paused in her chanting, looking at me with a mixture of surprise and irritation. "Return to your place, Omega," she said firmly. But I couldn't move back. That pull in my chest was stronger now, almost painful. I took another step forward. "Don't," I said louder this time. "Don't bury him." Dominic's head snapped up, his eyes locking with mine for the first time in years. I remembered him from childhood. He had been kinder then, before the weight of future leadership hardened him. Now his gaze was cold, assessing. "What did you say?" he demanded, his voice deep and controlled, but with an edge that made several nearby pack members step back. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of every eye upon me. My hands trembled, but that certainty inside me only grew stronger. "Don't bury him," I repeated, and this time my voice carried across the clearing. "He's not dead." A shocked murmur ran through the crowd. Elena stepped forward, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "This is outrageous," she spat. "Harper, you've gone too far this time. The king has been examined by our healers. His heart has stopped." "How dare you interrupt this sacred—" "Look at his lips," I interrupted, pointing with a shaking hand. "That's not death. That's wolfsbane poisoning. The paralysis mimics death, but—" "Enough!" Dominic roared, silencing everyone. He strode toward me, his towering presence making me shrink back instinctively. "You claim my father isn't dead? Based on what? What would an Omega know of such matters?" His face was inches from mine now, his anger a palpable force. I should have backed down, should have apologized and retreated to my proper place, but that pull inside me wouldn't let me. "I've studied with Marlene," I whispered, naming the pack's oldest healer who had taken pity on me years ago and allowed me to assist her. "I've seen wolfsbane poisoning before. If we don't act quickly, he really will die. But right now he's just paralyzed. His consciousness is trapped inside." Dominic studied my face with such intensity that I had to fight the urge to look away. Behind him, I could sense the council members exchanging glances, some worried, some skeptical, some openly hostile. "If you're wrong," Dominic said softly, dangerously, "I'll have you banished for this disruption. Do you understand?" I nodded, though banishment would likely mean death for an Omega alone in the world. "And if I'm right?" I dared to ask. A flicker of something, not quite softness, but perhaps respect, crossed his features before disappearing. "Then we'll discuss your place in this pack." Without waiting for a response, he turned to the elders. "Bring Marlene forward, and someone fetch the antidote ingredients, just in case." The next few minutes were chaos. Marlene was brought to examine the Alpha King more thoroughly while I stood frozen in place, suddenly aware of what I had done. If I was wrong, I had just signed my own exile papers. If I was right, I didn't know what would happen, but change was coming either way. Marlene's gnarled hands moved deftly over Emmett's body, checking signs that only she knew to look for. After what seemed like an eternity, she straightened and turned to face Dominic. "The Omega is right," she announced, her voice carrying the weight of her years and wisdom. "This is wolfsbane poisoning, and advanced. We have little time." The clearing erupted in shocked exclamations. Dominic's expression hardened as he barked orders for the antidote preparation. Marlene gestured for me to approach. "Help me, child," she said, ignoring the startled looks from those around us. "You recognized it. Now help me save him." With trembling hands, I joined her at the Alpha King's side. Together, we worked to prepare his body for the antidote, positioning him properly, clearing his airways, monitoring the weak pulse that only the most sensitive touch could detect. Around us, the pack watched in stunned silence as I, the forgotten Omega, touched their revered king with careful, knowing hands. "Who would do this?" I whispered to Marlene as we worked. Her ancient eyes met mine briefly. "That's the question your observation has forced them to answer, isn't it? And they won't like where it leads," I glanced up to find Dominic watching us, watching me, with an unreadable expression. There was suspicion there, yes, but something else too. Recognition, perhaps, as if he were seeing me for the first time. The antidote arrived, a bitter-smelling concoction that Marlene administered with my assistance. The pack held its collective breath as we stepped back, waiting. For several heartbeats, nothing happened. The clearing was so silent, I could hear the rustle of leaves in the canopy above. Then, just as the tension became unbearable, Emmett Blackwood drew a shuddering breath. His chest rose and fell, once, twice. His eyelids flickered, and a groan escaped his lips. Around us, pack members gasped, some falling to their knees in shock and relief. I backed away, suddenly aware that my place at the Alpha King's side was temporary, a bizarre exception that would soon be corrected. But as I turned to slip away, Dominic's hand caught my wrist. "Wait," he said, his voice lower now, meant only for me. His touch was neither gentle nor harsh, simply firm, inescapable. I looked up at him, unable to read his expression. Was this the beginning of my punishment? Or something else entirely? "How did you know?" he asked, his eyes searching mine. "How did you see what our healers missed?" I swallowed hard, conscious of his fingers still around my wrist, of the warmth radiating from his touch. "I just felt it," I admitted. Something wasn't right. His eyebrows drew together. "Felt it," he repeated, as if testing the words. "Not knowledge from your studies with Marlene. You felt it." It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway. Behind him, the king was now sitting up, disoriented but alive, surrounded by relieved council members and guards. Soon they would remember that an attempted assassination had taken place. Soon the questions would begin, and somehow, I knew I had just placed myself at the center of a storm that had been brewing long before today. Dominic released my wrist but remained close, too close for comfort. "Don't leave the clearing," he said quietly. "When my father is stabilized, there will be questions, many questions." As he walked away to join his father, I stood rooted to the spot, the reality of what had just happened crashing over me in waves. I had saved the Alpha King. I had changed the course of our pack's history. And in doing so, I had made myself visible after a lifetime of strategic invisibility. Around me, pack members who had never spared me a second glance now stared openly, their expressions ranging from awe to suspicion to outright hostility. Whatever happened next, nothing would be the same. The thought terrified me, yet underneath the fear was something else, a tiny, fragile seed of possibility. I touched the river stone in my pocket and took a deep breath. The water had found a new path around the rock. Where it would lead, I couldn't yet imagine. Night had fallen by the time the questioning began. The pack's great hall, usually reserved for celebrations and official ceremonies, now hummed with tension and whispered theories. I sat on a hard wooden chair in the center of the room, aware of how the ceremonial torches cast elongated shadows across the floor, shadows that seemed to reach toward me like accusing fingers. The Alpha King had been moved to his chambers, surrounded by his most trusted guards and healers. Marlene had gone with him, but not before squeezing my hand and whispering, "Speak only truth, child. Nothing more, nothing less." Easy for her to say. She wasn't sitting alone before the Pack Council, facing Dominic's penetrating stare. "Tell us again," Councilwoman Vivian said, her voice sharp as flint. "Exactly how you knew." I'd already answered this question 3 times. My throat felt dry, and my hands couldn't seem to stop trembling. "I noticed the blue tinge to his lips," I repeated, and the slight spasm in his left hand. "These aren't signs of natural death, but of wolfsbane poisoning." "Convenient that you would recognize such specific symptoms," Councilman Thomas remarked, stroking his beard thoughtfully. "Where exactly did you encounter wolfsbane poisoning before?" The accusation in his tone wasn't subtle. Around the room, several council members nodded in agreement. They were looking for a scapegoat, and what better candidate than the Pax Omega? The one with no family ties, no protectors, no power. I gripped the edge of my chair. 2 summers ago, a child from the eastern border families ate berries growing near wolfsbane. Marlene saved him, and she explained the symptoms to me. And you remembered such details after all this time, Vivian pressed. I remember everything Marlene teaches me, I answered simply. It was true. In a world where I had so little control, knowledge was the one thing I could claim for myself. Dominic, who had been silently watching from his position at the head of the council table, finally spoke. The question isn't how she recognized the poisoning, he said, his deep voice commanding immediate attention. The question is who administered it, and why they wanted us to bury my father while he could still be saved. A heavy silence fell over the room. This was the heart of it, the uncomfortable truth no one wanted to face. Whoever had poisoned the Alpha King was almost certainly in this room, or closely connected to someone who was. Perhaps, Thomas suggested carefully, we should consider that the Omega herself? No. Dominic cut him off, his tone brooking no argument. If she were involved, she wouldn't have stopped the burial. Logic, Thomas. I blinked in surprise at this unexpected defense. But Dominic wasn't looking at me. His focus had shifted to the council members, studying their reactions. Whoever did this, he continued, wanted us to believe my father died naturally. They didn't account for someone with knowledge of poisons being present at the ceremony. Or perhaps, a silky voice interjected from the shadows. They counted on exactly that. Councilwoman Regina stepped forward into the light. Unlike the others, she hadn't questioned me yet. Beautiful and calculating, she had always been something of an enigma within the pack, respected for her intelligence but feared for her ambition. What are you suggesting? Dominic asked, his expression guarded. Regina's smile didn't reach her eyes. Only that we should consider all possibilities, including the one where our Omega friend here isn't the hero of this story, but merely playing her part in a more complex plot. My heart pounded against my ribs. I saved him, I said, finding a courage I didn't know I possessed. Why would I do that if I were involved in a plot against him? To gain trust, perhaps? Regina tilted her head. To position yourself advantageously for whatever comes next. You've always been observant, Harper, always watching from the shadows. Who knows what ambitions lurk behind those quiet eyes? The accusation was so absurd I almost laughed. Ambitions. My greatest ambition had always been simple survival, to make it through each day without becoming a target. That's enough, Dominic said, and though his voice remained measured, there was a dangerous edge to it. We're not here to indulge in baseless accusations. Harper will remain under watch, as will everyone who had access to my father's food and drink over the past day. Under whose watch? Thomas asked pointedly. Dominic's jaw tightened. Mine. A murmur rippled through the council. This was unprecedented. The future Alpha taking personal responsibility for an Omega. Until my father recovers enough to tell us what he knows, Dominic continued, I'll be assuming temporary leadership of the pack, as is my right. My first order is that no one leaves the territory without express permission. My second is that Harper will be moved to the Alpha residence for her protection. Protection? Vivian echoed incredulously. Or containment? Both, Dominic replied without hesitation. She identified the poisoning. That makes her either valuable or dangerous, possibly both. Either way, I want her where I can see her. I stared at him, unable to mask my shock. The Alpha residence was forbidden territory for someone of my rank. Moving me there would violate a dozen pack traditions. This council session is adjourned, Dominic announced, standing abruptly. Harper, come with me. As I rose on unsteady legs, I caught Regina's calculating gaze following me. The look sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the evening's cool air. Outside, the night had grown cold and clear, stars speckling the sky above the pack's compound. Dominic walked ahead of me, his broad shoulders tense, his stride purposeful. I hurried to keep pace, wondering if I was being led to sanctuary or a more elaborate prison. You're afraid, he said without turning, his voice startling me after the long silence. Yes, I admitted, seeing no point in denying the obvious. He slowed his pace slightly, allowing me to draw even with him. Good. Fear will keep you alert. You'll need to be. We passed the communal areas where pack members normally gathered in the evenings. Tonight they were oddly empty, with most having retreated to their homes to process the day's shocking events. Do you think I had something to do with the poisoning? I asked quietly. Dominic stopped walking and turned to face me. In the moonlight, his features seemed carved from stone. If I believed that, he said, you wouldn't be walking beside me right now. The implied threat should have frightened me, but instead it offered a strange sort of comfort. At least he was being honest. Then why bring me to the Alpha residence? Something flickered in his eyes. Frustration, perhaps, or impatience, because someone just tried to kill my father and make it look like natural causes. You exposed that plan, which means you're either very brave or very foolish, and either way, you're now a target. I hadn't considered that. In the chaos of the day, I'd been so focused on the accusation that I might be involved, I hadn't thought about how my actions would be viewed by the actual poisoner. You think they'll come after me next? I said, the realization settling like a weight in my stomach. I would, if I were them. His directness was jarring. You're a loose end. And historically, our pack hasn't placed much value on your life, which makes you an easy target. The casual cruelty of this assessment stung, even though it was nothing I didn't already know. So I'm bait? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. No, Harper, you're under my protection, whether either of us likes it or not. He resumed walking. Now come. We need to get you settled before I check on my father. The Alpha residence stood apart from the rest of the pack's homes, a sprawling structure of stone and timber that had been expanded by generations of leaders. As we approached, the guards stationed at the entrance straightened, their surprise evident as they took in my presence at Dominic's side. Sir, one of them said hesitantly, is the Omega a guest? Dominic finished for him, and to be treated as such, spread the word. Inside, the residence was warm and smelled of cedar and something herbal. Healing poultices, I guessed, prepared for the king. A middle-aged woman I recognized as the head of the household staff approached, her expression carefully neutral. Diana. Dominic addressed her. Prepare the east guest room for Harper. She'll be staying with us until further notice. Diana's eyes widened slightly, but she nodded without comment. Right away, sir. And the king is asking for you. Dominic nodded. I'll go to him now. He turned to me. Wait here. Diana will show you to your room once it's prepared. Don't wander. With that, he disappeared down a hallway, leaving me standing awkwardly in the entrance hall, painfully aware of Diana's curious gaze. Well, she said finally, this is unexpected. I managed a weak smile, for both of us. To my surprise, Diana chuckled. I imagine so. Come, you can wait in the kitchen. It's warmer there, and you look like you could use some tea. I followed her through the residence, trying not to gawk at the craftsmanship evident in every beam and stone. The kitchen was indeed warm, centered around a large hearth where a pot of something savory simmered. Sit, Diana instructed, gesturing to a wooden bench near the hearth. The east room hasn't been used in months. It'll take a bit to air it out and make it suitable. As she moved about preparing tea, I found myself relaxing slightly for the first time since the ceremony. The kitchen, with its practical arrangement and familiar scents, felt more like home than the grandeur of the rest of the residence. You're the one who spotted the poisoning, Diana said. Not a question, but a statement. She placed a steaming mug in front of me. I nodded, wrapping my cold fingers around the warmth of the ceramic. Brave, she commented, or foolhardy. Time will tell which. That seems to be the consensus, I murmured, taking a careful sip. The tea was strong and sweet, with hints of chamomile and something else I couldn't place. Diana studied me openly, her expression thoughtful. You know, the last Omega who stayed in this house was Dominic's grandmother, Elizabeth. She was before your time, but they say she had a gift for seeing things others missed. I nearly choked on my tea. Dominic's grandmother was an Omega. Diana nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. The pack doesn't much discuss it these days. Doesn't fit the narrative of strength above all else. But yes, she was. And a formidable woman, despite her rank. This revelation stunned me. I'd never heard this piece of pack history. Though perhaps that wasn't surprising. The pack's formal histories tended to emphasize strength, conquest, and bloodlines. What happened to her? I asked. She lived a long life and died peacefully in her sleep, Diana said simply, which in our world is something of a miracle in itself. Before I could ask more questions, the sound of approaching footsteps silenced our conversation. Dominic appeared in the doorway, his expression grave. "My father is awake," he announced. "And he's asking for you, Harper." Diana's eyebrows shot up in surprise, but she said nothing. "Me?" I echoed, certain I'd misheard. "Why would he ask for me?" "That," Dominic said, "is what I intend to find out. Come." Setting down my half-finished tea, I rose to follow him, trying to ignore the flutter of anxiety in my chest. Why would the Alpha King, just barely recovered from death's door, ask to see the Pax Omega? As we walked through the residence's hushed corridors, Dominic spoke without looking at me. "My father is weak. The poison damaged his system significantly. The healers say he'll recover, but it will take time. I'm glad," I said honestly. Whatever my complicated feelings about pack hierarchy, I'd never wished harm on Emmett Blackwood. Dominic stopped outside an ornately carved door, turning to face me fully. "Before we go in, I need to know something," he said, his voice low. "That moment in the clearing, when you stepped forward, was it truly just because you recognized the symptoms, or was there something more?" I hesitated, unsure how to explain what I scarcely understood myself. "There was a feeling," I admitted finally, "like being pulled by an invisible thread. I can't explain it better than that." Dominic's expression remained unreadable, but something in his eyes intensified. "A feeling," he repeated softly. Then, without another word, he pushed open the door to his father's chambers. The king's chambers were dimly lit, heavy curtains drawn against the night, the air thick with the scent of healing herbs and beeswax candles. Emmett Blackwood lay propped against pillows, his imposing frame diminished by illness, but his eyes, sharp and clear, betrayed the strength that still resided within him. Marlene sat in a chair beside his bed, grinding something in a small mortar. She glanced up as we entered, offering me a small nod before rising. "I'll leave you to speak," she said, gathering her healing supplies. "To me," she added quietly as she passed, "you did well, child." When the door closed behind her, the silence in the room felt oppressive. I remained near the entrance, unsure of my place in this sacred space. Dominic moved to his father's bedside, his posture both protective and deferential. "You asked for her," Dominic said simply. The Alpha King's gaze shifted to me, and I felt the weight of his assessment. Despite his weakened state, there was nothing diminished about the power of his attention. "Come closer, Omega," he said, his voice raspy but commanding. I approached cautiously, stopping at the foot of his bed, my hands clasped tightly together to hide their trembling. "Harper," I said softly. "My name is Harper." A faint smile touched the king's lips. "Harper," he repeated. "You saved my life today." "Marlene saved you," I corrected instinctively, then immediately regretted speaking out of turn. But the king only chuckled, the sound dissolving into a slight cough. "Marlene administered the cure, but you prevented them from burying me alive." His expression grew serious. "That requires explanation." Dominic watched me carefully as I struggled to find the right words. "I saw the signs of wolfsbane poisoning," I began. "So I've been told," the king interrupted. "But Marlene says you insisted I wasn't dead before you were close enough to see those signs. How did you know to look?" The question hung in the air between us. I touched the river stone in my pocket, drawing comfort from its smooth surface. "I felt something was wrong," I admitted. "A pulling sensation. I can't explain it better than that." The king and his son exchanged a glance that contained volumes of unspoken communication. "When was the last time you shifted forms, Harper?" the king asked unexpectedly. The question caught me off guard. As an Omega, I rarely shifted. My wolf form was smaller, weaker than the others, and I'd learned early on that transformation made me vulnerable. 3 months ago, I answered. During the autumn equinox gathering. And how did it feel? I frowned, confused by this line of questioning. Normal, I suppose. Difficult, as always. Painful. The last word slipped out before I could stop it. The king nodded, as if I'd confirmed something. Dominic tells me you've been studying with Marlene. Not formally, I clarified quickly. I just help her sometimes, with preparing herbs and caring for the sick. She speaks highly of your intuition, the king said, says you have a natural sense for what others need, a rare gift. I shifted uncomfortably under his scrutiny, unused to praise of any kind. I just try to be useful, I murmured. Yes, the king said thoughtfully. You've made quite an art of that, haven't you? Being useful enough to keep, but not noticeable enough to threaten. The assessment was so accurate it stole my breath. For years, that had been my entire survival strategy. Exist in the margins, contribute enough to justify my presence, never draw attention or challenge the hierarchy. Until today, when I'd stepped forward and changed everything, someone tried to kill me, the king continued, his tone matter of fact. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing. They used a particular strain of wolfsbane that mimics death almost perfectly. Few would have spotted it, but she did, Dominic said, speaking for the first time since we'd entered the room. Yes, the king agreed. The question is why she was permitted to recognize it at all. I blinked, confused. Permitted? The king's gaze was penetrating. Have you never wondered, Harper, why an Omega would have such acute senses? Such intuition? Your kind are typically dulled to the subtleties our world offers. A mercy, some would say, given your place in it. My mind raced to keep up with his implications. I had always attributed my heightened awareness to necessity. I'd needed to be observant to survive the pack's subtle politics and shifting alliances. I don't understand, I said honestly. The king sighed, leaning back against his pillows. No, I don't suppose you would. We've kept too many secrets for too long. He looked at Dominic. Your mother would say it's time. Dominic's jaw tightened, but he nodded once, curtly. There's more to this than a simple assassination attempt, the king told me. You've stumbled into something ancient, something that predates our current pack structure. A coughing fit interrupted him, and Dominic quickly poured water from a pitcher by the bedside. As the king drank, Dominic gave me a warning look that clearly said, "Don't push him too far." When the king had recovered, he fixed me with a steady gaze. You need to be careful, Harper. Whoever poisoned me will come for you next. Now that you've exposed them. That's why I've moved her here, Dominic said. She'll be protected. Good. The king nodded. But physical protection isn't enough. She needs to understand what she is. I looked between them, frustration building. I'm standing right here, I reminded them. And I don't appreciate being discussed as if I can't hear you. To my surprise, the king laughed. A genuine laugh this time that transformed his stern features. See, Dominic? Elizabeth's blood runs true. Dominic's expression remained carefully neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or resignation. Elizabeth? I echoed. Your mother? The Omega that Diana mentioned? The king's eyebrows rose. Diana's been telling tales, has she? Just that your mother was an Omega, I said quickly, not wanting to get Diana in trouble. Nothing more. She was indeed, the king confirmed, and much more than that. As I suspect are you. Before I could ask what he meant, a knock at the door interrupted us. A guard entered, his expression grave. Sir, he addressed Dominic. Councilwoman Regina is requesting an immediate meeting with the full council. She says it's urgent, regarding the investigation. Dominic frowned. At this hour? She's insisting, sir. Says she has new information that can't wait until morning. I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. Regina had been watching me like a hawk during the questioning, her eyes calculating, assessing. What new information could she possibly have? Dominic glanced at his father, who gave a small nod. Go, the king said. But remember what we discussed earlier. Harper comes with me, Dominic said firmly, surprising me once again. The guard looked uncertain. Councilwoman Regina specifically requested. I don't care what she requested. Dominic cut him off. Where I go, the Omega goes. Those are my orders. The guard bowed his head in acquiescence and retreated. You don't have to bring me, I said once we were alone again. I can stay here, or go to the room Diana's preparing. No, Dominic said, his tone brooking no argument. I meant what I said. You stay where I can see you. He turned to his father. We'll continue this conversation when I return. The king nodded, his eyes already drooping with exhaustion. Remember, son, trust is a luxury we can't afford right now. As we left the king's chambers, I tried to make sense of the cryptic conversation. What did the king mean about me understanding what I am? What did Elizabeth's blood have to do with anything? And why had my intuition, something I'd always viewed as simply a useful survival skill, suddenly become so important? The walk to the council chambers was tense and silent. Night had fully settled over the Pack compound, and the pathways were lit by occasional torches that cast long shadows across the ground. Despite the late hour, I could sense eyes watching from windows, feel the weight of curiosity and suspicion following our progress. "Whatever happens in there," Dominic said as we approached the council building, "say nothing unless directly questioned. Do you understand?" I nodded, though frustration bubbled inside me. I was tired of being treated like a chess piece, moved around a board according to rules no one had bothered to explain to me. "And if I am questioned?" I asked. He stopped, turning to face me fully. In the torchlight, his features were sharply defined, almost predatory. "Then choose your words carefully. Regina is dangerous, more so than you realize. Why does she hate me so much?" I asked. "I've never done anything to her." Something like grim amusement crossed his face. "It's not about what you've done, Harper. It's about what you might be." Before I could ask what he meant, he pushed open the council building doors, and we stepped into the warmly lit interior. The main chamber was already full. All 12 council members seated around the great table, with Regina standing at its head. She turned as we entered, her smile as sharp as a blade. "Ah, acting alpha," she greeted Dominic, her tone honeyed with false deference. "How kind of you to join us." Her gaze flickered to me and the smile thinned. "I see you've brought your project." Several council members shifted uncomfortably. Whatever Regina had planned, they were clearly already aware of it. "What's this about, Regina?" Dominic asked, ignoring her barb. He remained standing, and so I did too, hovering uncertainly at his side. Regina's perfect posture somehow became even more rigid. "It's about the attempted assassination of our king," she replied. "And about who might have had both motive and opportunity." She gestured to a guard standing by the wall, who stepped forward and placed a small cloth bundle on the table. With deliberate movements, Regina unwrapped it, revealing a small glass vial with remnants of a dark substance inside. "This was found an hour ago," she announced, "hidden beneath the floorboards in Harper's dwelling." A shock of disbelief ran through me. "That's not mine," I said instantly, forgetting Dominic's warning to stay silent. Regina's smile widened fractionally. "No? How curious, then, that it bears your scent." "Impossible," I breathed, though doubt began to gnaw at me. Could someone have planted it? When? "We had your dwelling searched," Regina continued smoothly, "as we did for everyone with access to the king's food and drink, per acting alpha Dominic's orders." She turned to Dominic. "Surely you don't object to us following your own directive?" Dominic's expression remained impassive, but I could feel the tension radiating from him. "And who conducted this search?" he asked. "Guards Matthias and Eric," Regina replied promptly, "both loyal to the crown, as you know." I recognized the names. Both were younger warriors, ambitious and eager to prove themselves. And both looked up to Dominic's cousin, Victor, who had always made his disdain for me perfectly clear. "The vial contains wolfsbane residue," Regina continued. "The same strain used to poison the king, according to Marlene's assessment." Murmurs broke out among the council members. I felt the ground shifting beneath me. Everything I'd built, my precarious place in the pack, all crumbling away. "That's not possible," I insisted, louder this time. "I would never—" "Harper," Dominic interrupted, his voice calm, but carrying an unmistakable warning. He turned to Regina. "You've made a serious accusation, one that conveniently ignores the fact that Harper is the one who prevented my father from being buried alive." "Yes," Regina nodded, as if she'd anticipated this argument. A clever move, wasn't it, to position herself as the savior, gaining immediate access and trust. Who would suspect the very person who saved the king? And what possible motive would an Omega have for killing the Alpha King? Dominic challenged. Regina's smile was triumphant now, as if he'd walked into a trap. Why, the same motive as anyone else seeking power, advancement. But not for herself. Her gaze shifted deliberately between Dominic and me. For her patron. Shock rippled through me as her implication became clear. She was suggesting I'd acted as Dominic's agent, that he had orchestrated his own father's assassination and used me to cover his tracks. Dominic laughed, the sound so unexpected and genuine that several council members flinched. If I wanted my father dead, Regina, I would challenge him openly, as is my right. I wouldn't resort to poison and subterfuge. Perhaps, Regina allowed. Or perhaps you recognize that your father's support within the pack has been waning, and a challenge might not have gone your way. The council chamber had grown so silent I could hear the crackle of the hearth fire. The accusation Regina had just leveled was as dangerous as it was audacious. This is absurd, I said, unable to contain myself any longer. I saved the king because it was the right thing to do, not because of some elaborate plot. I pointed at the vial. That was planted in my home. I've never seen it before. Regina's expression hardened. The evidence suggests otherwise. And given the severity of the crime, the council has already voted on immediate action. My heart sank. They'd held a vote before we'd even arrived, before I'd had a chance to defend myself. The council moves that the Omega be held in isolation until a formal trial can be arranged, Regina announced, and that acting Alpha Dominic temporarily step aside while his potential involvement is investigated. Dominic stepped forward, and the air around him seemed to vibrate with barely contained fury. "You overstep, councilwoman," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "My father still lives, and while he recovers, leadership falls to me. That is our law. And when leadership is compromised," Regina countered, "the council must act to preserve the pack. That, too, is our law." They stared at each other in silent challenge, neither willing to back down. I stood frozen, acutely aware that my fate hung in the balance of this power struggle. "Take the Omega to the holding cells," Regina ordered the guards by the door. As they moved toward me, Dominic shifted position slightly, placing himself between me and the approaching guards. "She remains under my protection," he said, each word edged with authority. "Dominic," Councilman Thomas interjected, his tone conciliatory, "surely you see how this looks. For the sake of transparency, allow the process to unfold. If she's innocent, she has nothing to fear." I almost laughed at the absurdity of that statement. In our world, innocence was rarely enough to guarantee safety. Dominic remained unmoved. My father has questioned her personally, and is satisfied with her explanation. His word supersedes the council's. This revelation caused a stir. Several council members exchanged glances, clearly reconsidering their positions. Regina's composure cracked slightly. "The king is weak, possibly confused from the poison." "Choose your next words very carefully," Dominic interrupted, his voice deadly quiet. The tension in the room was suffocating. I could feel the council's allegiances shifting, calculations being made and remade as this unexpected standoff unfolded. "Perhaps," Councilwoman Vivian suggested after a long silence, "a compromise. The Omega remains under Dominic's watch, but with additional guards present. The investigation continues with full transparency." Regina's lips thinned in displeasure, but she recognized that she'd lost her momentum. "Fine," she conceded. "But the council will expect daily reports and access to the Omega for further questioning when necessary." "Agreed," Dominic said before I could object. "Now, if there's nothing else, my father needs rest, and your accusations have wasted enough of our time." Without waiting for a response, he turned and placed a hand at the small of my back, guiding me firmly toward the exit. The gesture, so casually possessive, sent a jolt of awareness through me that I quickly tried to suppress. Outside, the night air felt cool against my flushed skin. I waited until we were well away from the council building before speaking. "They voted before we even arrived," I said, anger finally breaking through my shock. "They were going to lock me away without even letting me speak." Dominic's expression was grim. "Regina has been planning this for some time. The poison, the evidence, the accusations. It's too coordinated to be spontaneous." "But why?" I asked, bewildered. "Why would she go to such lengths to frame me? I'm nobody." He looked at me then, really looked at me, as if seeing beyond the careful invisibility I'd cultivated for so long. "That," he said quietly, is where you're wrong, and it's time you understood why. We returned to the Alpha residence in silence, the weight of Regina's accusations heavy between us. The night had grown colder, and I hugged my arms around myself, as much for comfort as for warmth. My mind raced with questions, each more unsettling than the last. What did Dominic mean when he said I was wrong about being nobody? What secrets was the king hinting at regarding my intuition? And most pressingly, who had planted that vial in my home? Diana met us at the entrance, her expression concerned. I've prepared your room, she told me, and left some clothes that should fit you. Thank you, I said, suddenly aware of how exhausted I felt. The day's events had drained me completely. Take her to the east room, Dominic instructed Diana. Then bring tea to my study. We'll join you there shortly. Diana nodded and gestured for me to follow her. As we walked through the residence's quiet hallways, I couldn't help noticing how the guards' positions had subtly shifted since our departure. More of them now, stationed at strategic points throughout the house. Dominic was taking no chances. The east room was simple but comfortable, far more luxurious than anything I was accustomed to. A large bed with soft linens dominated one wall, while a fireplace crackled cheerfully opposite it. A small sitting area near the window offered a view of the forest edge, though now there was only darkness beyond the glass. There's a washroom through there, Diana indicated a door to the right. Towels and soap are provided, and I've left some nightclothes and a change of outfit for tomorrow on the bed. This is too much, I said, overwhelmed by the unexpected kindness. Diana's expression softened. You saved our king's life today. Whether certain people choose to acknowledge that or not, this is the least we can do. After she left, I allowed myself a moment to simply breathe. The room smelled of lavender and clean linen, so different from my humble dwelling with its persistent scent of wood smoke and herbs. I ran my fingers over the soft blanket folded at the foot of the bed, marveling at its texture. A quick wash and change of clothes later, I made my way to Dominic's study, following Diana's directions. 2 guards nodded respectfully as I approached, a novel experience that left me momentarily disoriented. Never in my life had pack warriors acknowledged me with anything resembling respect. Dominic's study was warm and dimly lit, with bookshelves lining the walls and a massive desk positioned near the windows. He stood by the fireplace, staring into the flames, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He'd changed clothes as well, trading his formal attire for a simple dark sweater and trousers. Sit, he said without turning, gesturing to one of 2 armchairs positioned before the fire. I perched on the edge of the seat, feeling out of place among such luxury. Diana arrived moments later with a tray of tea and biscuits, setting it on the small table between the chairs before quietly withdrawing. Dominic finally turned from the fireplace, studying me with that penetrating gaze that seemed to see far more than I was comfortable revealing. He took the seat opposite mine, setting his glass aside. You have questions, he stated simply. Dozens, I admitted. Beginning with why Regina is so determined to frame me for a crime I didn't commit. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Regina's ambition has always outweighed her loyalty, but this suggests something more calculated, a plan long in the making. But why involve me? I pressed. If her target is you or your father, why drag me into it? Because you're the perfect scapegoat, he said bluntly, an omega with no family ties, no power, no defenders. Who would question your guilt if evidence was found? Who would fight for you? The truth of his assessment stung, even though I'd lived with this reality my entire life. No one, I answered softly. No one, he agreed. Except that you didn't play your part correctly. You were supposed to remain invisible as you've always been. Instead, you stepped forward and saved my father's life, disrupting whatever Regina had planned. I poured myself a cup of tea, needing something to do with my hands. The king said I've stumbled into something ancient. What did he mean? Dominic was quiet for a long moment, as if weighing how much to tell me. Our pack's history is not what most believe, he said finally. The stories we tell about strength and dominance, they're only part of the truth. He rose and moved to a bookshelf, removing a leather-bound volume that looked ancient, its spine cracked with age. This is the true chronicle of the Blackwood Pack, he said, returning to his seat. Not the sanitized version taught to our young. He opened the book carefully, its pages yellowed and fragile. For generations, our pack was guided by pairs, an alpha and an omega, working in balance. The alpha provided strength and protection. The omega provided insight and healing. Together, they maintained harmony not just within the pack, but with the natural world around us. I stared at him, struggling to reconcile this information with everything I'd been taught about pack hierarchy. That can't be right, I said. Omegas are the lowest rank. We're tolerated, not revered. Now, yes, he acknowledged. But it wasn't always so. The shift began 3 generations ago, when my great-grandfather took power. He believed strength was all that mattered, that the old ways made us vulnerable. He systematically dismantled the Alpha-Omega partnership, relegating Omegas to the lowest position, and elevating those who demonstrated physical prowess. And no one stopped him? I asked incredulously. Dominic's expression darkened. Those who opposed him met unfortunate ends. Over time, the truth was buried, and a new reality took its place. But your grandmother, Elizabeth, she was an Omega. Yes, he confirmed. And my grandfather loved her deeply, despite the changed traditions. He protected her, elevated her position as much as he dared. When my father took power, he maintained that protection out of respect for his mother. I tried to absorb this information, this radical revision of everything I thought I knew about our world. So, what does this have to do with me? I asked. With what's happening now. Dominic closed the book and set it aside. There are those in our pack who know the old histories, who believe we've strayed too far from our true nature, and there are others who would do anything to maintain the current power structure. And you think Regina is one of the latter? I know she is, he said grimly. She's from one of the warrior bloodlines that rose to prominence under my great-grandfather's rule. Their power depends on strength being the sole measure of worth. I sipped my tea, thinking. But that doesn't explain why I sensed the king wasn't dead, or why he asked about my shifting. Dominic studied me intently. True Omegas, those born with the ancient gifts, have abilities that go beyond physical strength. They can sense emotions, intentions. They can feel the life force in others. And their connection to their wolf form is different. Different how? Painful, he said simply. Because the wolf is trying to express abilities that have been suppressed, both by social conditioning and by the belief that they don't exist. I thought about my transformations, how they'd always been more agonizing than they seemed to be for others, how I'd avoided shifting whenever possible because of it. Had there been something more to that pain all along? You're saying I'm one of these true Omegas? The idea seemed absurd. I'm saying it's possible, Dominic replied. You're sensing that my father was still alive when everyone else, including our healers, believed him dead. That's not normal awareness, Harper. That's something else entirely. I set my cup down, my hand suddenly unsteady. And if I am? What does that mean? His expression grew serious. It means you're even more of a threat to people like Regina than you realize. If others began to see that there's power in being an Omega, a different kind of power, but power nonetheless, it would undermine the entire hierarchy they've built. So, Regina tried to kill your father, knowing I would somehow sense it wasn't a natural death? I shook my head. That makes no sense. She couldn't have known I would speak up. No, Dominic agreed. I think her plan was simpler: kill my father, make it look natural, and position herself as a key advisor to me. Or possibly eliminate me too, if the opportunity arose. Finding the vial in your dwelling was likely improvisation after you disrupted her original plan. I rose from my chair, too agitated to remain still. This is insane. Yesterday I was just nobody. The pack Omega who helped the healer sometimes. And now you're telling me I'm part of some ancient tradition that threatens the entire pack structure? Dominic watched me pace, his expression unreadable. Yesterday, you were hiding who you are, he said quietly. Today, you stopped hiding. That's the only difference. His words struck a chord that resonated painfully within me. Hadn't I spent my entire life making myself smaller, less noticeable, training myself not to react, not to challenge, not to show the full extent of what I felt or thought? I don't know how to be this person you're describing. I admitted. I don't know how to be anything other than invisible. Dominic stood, closing the distance between us. Up close, the height difference between us was more pronounced. He towered over me, all lean muscle and quiet power, yet for the first time, I didn't feel the need to shrink away from his presence. "You don't have to know yet," he said. "You just have to survive long enough to learn." The intensity in his gaze made something flutter in my chest, something that had nothing to do with fear, and everything to do with a connection I didn't yet understand. A sharp knock at the study door broke the moment. One of the guards entered, his expression tense. "Sir," he addressed Dominic. "There's been an incident. The king's personal guard has been found unconscious outside his chambers. The king is safe, but—" "Regina," I breathed, the pieces falling into place. Dominic was already moving toward the door. "Double the guards on my father's room," he ordered, "and send for Marlene immediately. If the guard was drugged, we need to know with what." He turned back to me. "Stay here. Lock the door behind me and open it only for Diana or myself. Do you understand?" I nodded, suddenly afraid in a way I hadn't been before. This wasn't just pack politics anymore. This was a direct attack, despite all the security measures Dominic had put in place. As the door closed behind him, I moved to lock it as instructed. But as my fingers touched the latch, that strange pulling sensation returned. The same one I'd felt in the clearing when the king lay dead before the pack. Only this time, it wasn't pulling me toward something. It was warning me away. I jerked my hand back from the door as if burned, a terrible certainty flooding through me. The guard, the king's chambers, it was all a diversion. The real danger wasn't there at all. It was here, coming for me. My heart pounded as I backed away from the door, the pulling sensation intensifying with each passing second. I scanned the study frantically, looking for a weapon, an escape route, anything that might help me. The window was too high and narrow. The fireplace tools offered little protection against whatever was coming. The river stone in my pocket seemed to grow warm against my thigh. I clutched it, my mother's words echoing in my mind. "Water doesn't fight the rock, it simply finds another way around." I needed to adapt, to think differently than my pursuers would expect. I moved silently to Dominic's desk and pressed the small button underneath that I'd noticed earlier. A silent alarm system that would alert the guards stationed throughout the residence. Then I slipped behind the heavy curtains adjacent to the bookshelf, controlling my breathing as I'd learned to do over years of making myself invisible. The doorknob turned slowly, testing. Finding it unlocked, the door eased open. Victor, Dominic's cousin, stepped into the study, his movements precise and controlled. Behind him came Matthias, one of the guards who had found the vial in my dwelling. Both carried knives with blades that gleamed oddly in the firelight, coated with something, I realized with a chill. "She's not here," Matthias whispered, scanning the room. "Check the adjoining rooms," Victor ordered. "She can't have gone far." As Matthias moved toward the small washroom connected to the study, Victor approached Dominic's desk, his fingers trailing over the polished surface. "Our future alpha," he sneered, "keeping an omega as a pet. Pathetic." I remained perfectly still, grateful that the heavy curtain fabric concealed my silhouette. Years of practice in disappearing into backgrounds, of controlling even my scent when necessary, served me well now. "Nothing," Matthias reported, returning from the washroom. "Should we check her assigned room?" "No," Victor said, his voice hardening. "She's here somewhere. I can sense her." He began to circle the room methodically, his nostrils flaring as he scented the air. I closed my eyes, focusing on an old technique Marlene had taught me for calming frightened children, how to slow their heart rates, how to gentle their fear scent into something milder, less detectable. "Become still water," I told myself. "Let him be the rock you flow around." Victor paused near the curtains, so close I could hear his breathing. My fingers closed tightly around the river stone, its smooth surface slick with my perspiration. "Behind the curtain," he said suddenly, triumphantly. I burst into motion the moment his hand grasped the fabric, diving low and rolling beneath his reaching arm. Surprise gave me a critical second of advantage, enough to put the desk between us. "There's our little troublemaker," Victor smiled. eyes gleaming with malicious pleasure. Regina sends her regrets that she couldn't attend to this personally. So she sent her errand boys instead, I replied, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. How fitting. Matthias lunged around the other side of the desk, but I was already moving, keeping the furniture between us. My mind raced ahead, mapping escape routes, calculating odds. The door was blocked, the windows too high. I needed to stall until the guards responded to the silent alarm, if they responded at all. You know what's amusing? Victor said conversationally, as if we were merely having a pleasant chat. How easy it was to convince everyone you were guilty. One little vial, and the entire council was ready to lock you away forever. That's how much you matter to them, Harper. That's how disposable you are. And yet, Regina felt the need to send 2 of you to handle one disposable Omega, I countered. I'm flattered by her concern. Victor's smile tightened. Precautions. After your little performance with the king, we couldn't take chances. It wasn't a performance, I said, inching toward the fireplace. You're poisoning an innocent man. Innocent? Victor laughed. Emmett Blackwood has preserved a system that keeps the strong in power, yes, but he's grown soft, talking about evolving traditions and reconsidering old ways. Regina heard him discussing the ancient texts with the elders, the ones about Omegas having special gifts. I reached the fireplace, and in one swift movement grabbed a heavy iron poker, holding it before me like a sword. It felt awkward in my hand, but better than facing them unarmed. You're afraid, I realized aloud. Not just of me, but of what I represent. We're afraid of regressing, Matthias spat, of returning to superstitious times when strength was compromised by sentiment. They were circling me now, one on each side, coordinating their movements with the practiced efficiency of hunters. Where are the guards? Victor mused, glancing at the door. Did you really think that silent alarm would save you? Half the night patrol is loyal to Regina. The others have been redirected. My grip on the poker tightened. If help wasn't coming, I needed a new plan. You won't get away with this, I said, playing for time as I edged closer to the hearth. Dominic will know it was you. Dominic will be too busy grieving his father's tragic relapse to worry about one missing Omega, Victor replied. By the time he starts asking questions, we'll have a very convincing story prepared about how you escaped and fled. An obvious admission of guilt. I lunged suddenly, swinging the poker at Victor's head. He dodged easily, but the movement brought me closer to my real target, the vase on the mantelpiece. In one fluid motion, I grabbed it and hurled it at the window. The crash of shattering glass was deafening in the quiet room. Cold night air rushed in through the broken window. I knew I couldn't escape through it. It was still too high, the opening too small, but the noise might attract attention from the grounds. Victor snarled in frustration, his composed facade cracking. Enough games, he growled and lunged for me. I swung the poker again, connecting solidly with his forearm. He howled in pain, but Matthias was already on me, grabbing me from behind. I drove my elbow back into his ribs with all my strength, hearing the satisfying crack of at least one breaking. He grunted but didn't release me. Victor recovered quickly, approaching with the poisoned knife. Hold her still, he ordered Matthias. This needs to look like suicide. As the knife drew closer, desperation surged through me. I slammed my head back into Matthias's face, feeling the crunch of his nose against my skull. His grip loosened just enough for me to twist sideways, but not enough to break free entirely. Victor lunged, the knife slicing through the air where I'd been a moment before. Instead of my heart, it slashed across my upper arm, cutting through the fabric of my borrowed shirt and into the flesh beneath. Pain blazed along my arm, followed almost immediately by a strange numbness. The poison. Whatever coated the blade was already entering my system. Matthias finally released me, stumbling back with blood streaming from his broken nose. I used the moment to put distance between us, backing toward the broken window, the poker still clutched in my good hand. It's done, Victor said, watching me with cruel satisfaction. The blade was coated with a concentrated extract. You'll be unconscious in minutes, dead shortly after. The room was already beginning to tilt oddly around me, edges blurring and colors intensifying. I forced myself to focus, to think through the growing fog. Why? I managed to ask, leaning against the wall for support. Why does Regina hate omegas so much? Victor's lip curled in disdain. Because her mother was one, a weak, sniveling creature, who brought shame to their bloodline. Regina has spent her entire life erasing that stain, proving that strength is all that matters. The irony wasn't lost on me, even through the spreading numbness. Regina, so desperate to escape her Omega heritage, had built her entire identity on rejecting it. "You're wrong about us," I said, my words beginning to slur. "Strength isn't just one thing." Victor shrugged, unconcerned with my dying philosophy. "Dispose of her through the window," he instructed Matthias. "Make it look like she jumped." As Matthias approached me, something strange began happening. The numbness in my arm was spreading. Yes, but rather than weakening me further, it seemed to be triggering something else, something buried deep within me that was now fighting to surface. Heat bloomed in my chest, spreading outward through my limbs. My vision shifted, colors becoming more vivid, scents sharper. I could suddenly smell the fear beneath Victor's confident exterior. Could hear the rapid flutter of Matthias's heartbeat. "What's happening to her?" Matthias asked, hesitating as he noticed the change. I felt it building like a wave, the shift that had always been painful and difficult now flowing through me with unexpected ease. But this wasn't a normal transformation. Something was different. My body began to change, but instead of the familiar agony of bones breaking and reforming, there was only warmth and a sense of rightness, as if I were finally allowing myself to become what I was always meant to be. Victor backed away, his eyes widening in alarm. "This isn't possible," he whispered. Before either of them could react further, the study door burst open. Dominic stood in the entrance, his expression transforming from concern to cold fury as he took in the scene. The broken window, Matthias's bloodied face, Victor's defensive posture, and me, slumped against the wall with a bleeding arm, caught in the midst of a strange partial shift. "I should kill you where you stand," Dominic said, his voice deadly quiet as he addressed his cousin. Victor raised his hands placatingly. "This isn't what it looks like. The Omega attacked us." "Don't," Dominic cut him off. "Don't insult me with lies." Guards flooded into the room behind him, quickly restraining both Victor and Matthias. One of them gasped when he saw me, and I realized how I must appear, neither fully human nor fully wolf, suspended in a transformation that defied everything we knew about shifting. "Dominic?" I managed to say, my voice strange even to my own ears. Poison on the blade. He was at my side in an instant, examining the cut on my arm. "Get Marlene," he barked at one of the guards. "Now." The room was spinning more violently now, darkness creeping in at the edges of my vision. Yet strangely, I wasn't afraid. The heat inside me continued to build, as if something ancient and powerful were awakening, burning away the poison molecule by molecule. "Stay with me," Dominic urged, supporting my weight as my legs finally gave out. "Harper, look at me. Stay awake." I tried to focus on his face, on the unexpected concern in his eyes. "I'm not what they think I am," I whispered. "I know," he said softly. "You're more." As consciousness began to slip away, I felt his arms lift me, cradling me against his chest. The last thing I heard was his voice, low and fierce, promising that I was safe now. I awoke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows. For a moment I lay still, trying to orient myself. I was in a large bed with soft linens, not in the east guest room but somewhere else. Somewhere that smelled of cedar and pine and faintly of Dominic. Memories flooded back. Victor and Matthias, the poisoned blade, the strange transformation that had begun before I lost consciousness. I sat up quickly, examining my arm. A neat bandage covered the wound, but beyond some residual tenderness, there was no pain, no numbness. "Easy," came Marlene's voice from nearby. She sat in a chair by the window, her weathered hands busy with some herbal preparation. "You've had quite the ordeal. How long was I unconscious?" I asked, my throat dry. "Just through the night," she replied, rising to pour me a glass of water from a pitcher by the bed. "The poison should have killed you, or at least kept you under for days. But your body fought it off with remarkable speed. I accepted the water gratefully, drinking deeply before asking the question foremost in my mind. What happened to me? When I was shifting, it didn't feel normal. Marlene smiled, a knowing look in her ancient eyes. No, I don't imagine it did. You experienced the beginning of a true Omega transformation, quite rare these days, since most Omegas are conditioned to suppress their gifts. Then it's true? I whispered. What Dominic told me about the old ways, about Omegas having abilities beyond what we're taught? Very true, she confirmed, though few remember it now. The door opened, and Dominic entered, looking tired but relieved to find me awake. He'd clearly been up all night. His clothes were rumpled, his hair disheveled, dark circles shadowing his eyes. How is she? He asked Marlene. Recovering remarkably well, the healer replied. As I told you she would. She gathered her supplies. I'll leave you two to talk. She should eat something soon, something light. Broth and bread would be best. After she left, Dominic took the seat she had vacated. For a moment, he simply looked at me, his expression unreadable. Victor and Matthias? I asked finally. In custody, along with Regina and 2 other council members implicated in the plot, he replied. They've confessed to attempting to assassinate my father and frame you for it. And the king. Recovering, and quite interested to hear about your unusual reaction to the poison. A small smile touched his lips. It seems you've managed to confirm his suspicions about you. I looked down at my hands, still not entirely sure what all of this meant for me. And what happens now? Dominic was quiet for a moment, considering. Now we begin to restore what was lost, he said finally. My father and I have already spoken to the remaining council members about the old texts, the true history of our pack. It won't be an easy transition. Generations of belief don't change overnight. And my place in all this? I dared to ask. He met my gaze directly. That depends on you. The old ways speak of partnership, of balance between Alpha and Omega. If you're willing, there's a place for you here. Not as a tolerated outsider, but as an essential counterpart to pack leadership. The offer was so far beyond anything I could have imagined for myself that I struggled to comprehend it. Just days ago, I had been invisible, surviving on the margins. Now I was being offered a position of respect, of purpose. I don't know how to be that person, I admitted. I've spent my whole life trying not to be noticed. Dominic reached out, hesitating briefly before taking my hand in his. The touch sent warmth spreading up my arm. You stopped trying to be invisible the moment you stepped forward to save my father, he said quietly. That was the real Harper, the one who sees what others miss, who acts when others hesitate, the one who adapts instead of breaking. I thought of my mother's riverstone, still in the pocket of my ruined clothes somewhere. Water doesn't fight the rock. It simply finds another way around. Perhaps this was my way around, not fighting the pack's structure directly, but helping to transform it from within, bringing balance where there had been only dominance. It won't be easy, I said, not quite a refusal. No, he agreed. Change never is, but we'll face it together. His hand tightened around mine, as partners. The word hung in the air between us, rich with possibility. Something shifted in his expression as he looked at me, a softening, a recognition. Not quite affection, not yet, but the potential for it. In that moment, I realized that the rejection and invisibility I'd endured all my life hadn't broken me. They'd prepared me. In learning to adapt, to observe, to survive, I'd developed exactly the strengths our pack now needed. Partners, I repeated. And for the first time in my life, I allowed myself to be fully seen.